Hello and welcome to another episode of Collectathoughts, the show where I collect my thoughts on video games. And today we'll be talking about I Saw Black Clouds, an interactive movie type of game. This one taking place after the death of a person and kind of playing as a friend of that person. Playing being a very, loose word in this case. But more on that in a bit. First I want to talk about why I even decided to play this game. I've never been a huge fan of this genre. If I want to watch a movie, I'll watch a movie. If I want to play a game, I'll play a game. But, I'm always willing to also just try the weird stuff in between, especially if it feels creative, by hopefully taking more inspiration from the game side of it than the movie side of it. Because, at that point, why bother? This is not foreshadowing for this video at all. Regardless, after having played another game in this genre, Death Come True, over half a year ago, I had gotten the idea to try another one of these games. And another one of these games on the Switch, yes, this is where I'll be reviewing this game, is I Saw Black Clouds, where I hope to find maybe a better example of this genre, or maybe just a better game in general, which unfortunately was not the case. So let's get into it. I'm gonna go light on the story because of course this is the part you don't want to spoil too much, but it is also one of the few things you can actually talk in a game like this. So let's get into it mildly. Following the story of Christina after the death of a close friend of hers, returns to her hometown and her friend's hometown to figure out what happened, and in that process finding some deep dark secrets of this small town, which is not a very creative setup, but a lot can be done with it. But, well, this game really doesn't go anywhere interesting. To review it more like a movie, well, it is clearly a very low budget thing, or I would almost dare say no budget thing. There's barely any special effects. What there is looks kind of bad. The settings could very easily just be, a friend's house, some barn that the guy let us film in, so we used it, a public park. It's the type of thing where if you've seen a student film, you kind of see through it very easily. It doesn't look horrible, but it does look very amateurish. And that feeling extends to the other parts of the filmmaking here. The cinematography has its moments. Sometimes there's a nice looking shot, but there's also just a myriad of really poor lighting and bad angles and kind of just an ugly look to it that feels disnecessary. But the worst part of it all is really the editing and maybe a little bit of the sound design. But the editing is the really big one I want to mention here. Cuts in this game are extremely awkward and weirdly stuttery. And the reason for that is because, or at least I believe is, because it's not a full movie file or it's not various large movie files, but in fact quite a lot of files, representing the scenes, and then of course, ordered in the right way, which wouldn't really be a problem if it wasn't noticeable, but it is. Like I said, the cuts feel awkward and there's quite a bit of stuttering, and the reason why I think that happens is because when a scene ends, it's a video file ending and then it's queuing up the next one, which gives it that weird in-between time of the video ending, closing, and opening the next one. Kind of like, having a playlist of videos on a media player. It's a problem that would be a lot more easily forgivable if it only happened during options or during a moment where things changed based on your decisions, but it kind of just happens very randomly at times. Like, this scene was shot and then they shot another scene. Those are two different video files, so it happens. It does take away from the experience, not that I was, terribly invested in it beforehand. Like I said, not much is done with this setup. Once again, a lot of it does come down to budget. This game definitely has a lower budget than the other movie game I reviewed, but still, it doesn't feel particularly well executed. For example, there's this scene early on where a hand comes from under the cupboard and grabs the main character's leg, and it just kind of comes off as stupid, even though it is kind of a cool idea, especially in live action. And here, of course, I'm assuming this, but it just doesn't feel like someone put a whole lot of thought into it. It feels as if the direction in that moment was, hey, look, there's gonna be a hand that comes from this cupboard and it's gonna grab your leg. That's the direction. Now film. And then of course the scene comes out dumb because you just pointed at a hand coming out of a closet and someone just mildly reacting to it. I don't want to harp on this too long, especially because a lot of it is me assuming, but it does feel like it was a cool idea that they either didn't know how to execute or really didn't put in the creativity to make it something special, and that kind of resonates for the whole movie. Not helping either is also the acting. I feel bad harping on this because clearly a lot of these guys are not particularly big actors or anything, but they're also not particularly good actors. The main character is probably the best one out of them all, and even she is not taking my breath away. Or maybe it did because I was yawning. Bad joke. Regardless, yeah, even as a movie, this isn't particularly anything great. So even if the next part about the gameplay bit is the best thing ever, this game would still be kind of lacking. But unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm not sure. No, the gameplay bit is not really anything special. With Death Come True, the other game I mentioned a couple times now, that one had some pretty cool menus, and there was a sense of integration between the gameplay and the story in a way that made it feel a little bit more immersive. But here it really just feels like you're watching a video. The R button skips the scene ahead and sometimes it just doesn't work. I'm not sure if it's not being able to skip scenes that I haven't seen yet or it's just kind of random. But I was pretty convinced that I couldn't skip some scenes that I was pretty sure I had seen before. So I was like, I think it's kind of random, which is just a weird bug to have in your game. I don't even know. Regardless, it also doesn't have that there's barely any UI. For example, when you're skipping through these scenes, it is not a fast forward. It is a literal just skip to the next video kind of thing. And it's only a skip forward, which wouldn't really be a problem if it felt clear what you were doing. But skipping forward feels like such a guesswork sometimes. And it's so easy to just overskip things that going back would really be useful. The only really UI we have here is the pause menu and a stats menu. Also choices, of course, but a bit more on that in a bit. The stats screen is what I really want to talk about first, and it's kinda useless. It doesn't actually tell you anything. It's supposed to tell you the state of your character based on your decisions, but there's just too many bars that it makes any sense. Like for example, there's an introspective bar, a strength bar, a morality and tact, and an honesty bar. Which, it could be interesting if, for example, things like the morality and the honesty were bars that went opposably up and down based on your choices. But not really. At the end of the game, I had everything except tact maxed out, so just say things in the game. And that's kind of what I want to get into now, is the choices of the game. One of my main annoyances, especially early on, was that you have no context for these choices. Often you'll get the choice of being kind of a good person or an asshole, but you don't really know the person you're talking to and you barely know yourself, the character. So it feels weird to be making that decision. And that's really annoying when most of the decisions are actually at the beginning of the game and you don't really know much about what's going on yet you're making all these decisions. Also adding to this annoying is that then after the early choices, as the game progresses, there are less and less choices, and often you'll go large amounts of time without any interaction, which once again would be fine, except for the fact that when you make a choice, it's like a 5-second timer. Meaning, if you're just kind of sitting there watching a cutscene for 10 to 15 minutes, and then suddenly a 5-second timer starts for you to pick a choice, and you have to pick up the controller, which you probably already left down because you're leaning back on your chair or your couch or whatever you're playing this on, and then you have to quickly grab it and pick one. it just doesn't make sense why they went with such a fast decision making in such a slow game. Especially since a lot of the times, most of the choices are not particularly urgent. Like, do I really need to decide to open this cupboard or leave in 5 seconds? It just kind of feels like it's a thing that they know games in this genre do, so they did it as well, even though there's no reason for it. In fact, I think, pausing the game to let you choose here would be a much better choice. As it stands, it really feels like a movie. You could fall asleep and the game will beat itself. Especially since all the endings are not all that different, and not responding to a lot of the choices doesn't really have much of a consequence. It feels so half-assed in that way. It really makes me think that this was never planned to be a game, and it really feels it when the choices barely have any effect, the endings all kind of look the same, and there's very little UI or any kind of visual representation within the game part of the game. It really feels like someone just found this movie, or they were making this movie and they went, well, this is not gonna sell as a movie, so let's make it into a video game and put in the minimum effort possible into turning it into a video game. And looking a bit deeper into it, and this developer, Wales Interactive, that does legitimately seem to be the case. All of their games in quotations, seem like really low budget B movies that no one would watch otherwise. But it does seem to be working for them. They've been doing this since 2016 and they've done one a year since then of this type of game. Which I get, if something is making you money, then make it again until it doesn't. That worked for Telltale. That was a bit of a bad taste joke, but regardless, I called Wales Interactive a developer, but they seem to be primarily a publisher, which would make sense for this type of game. I'm gonna keep hesitating calling these games, I'm sorry. Nothing against them. They find some movie, or they find someone willing to do a movie for a game, and then they probably buy the rights to it for fairly cheap. That would be my guess. Or maybe they just find people who want to do this type of movies and give them some money and say, make a game instead. Which isn't the worst idea, but with this game, obviously I was not left very impressed. And looking at their other titles, I can't say that they look very promising either. Regardless though, I went on a bit of a tangent. This review is about I Saw Black Clouds. I just thought it'd be interesting to mention this, as I found this out while I was making the review for this game. Regardless though, like I said, I Saw Black Clouds, not particularly an engaging story. The gameplay doesn't exist. I'll be honest, I kinda hate it. As a movie, it's bad. As a game, it's awful. It often comes off as pretentious. The story is slow and boring, and it doesn't need to be. This game is like 90 minutes long, and it feels so much longer. It does feel like they were just stretching it to reach that kind of length, so you wouldn't refund it as soon as you finish it, even though it's still like half an hour away from the refund policy. But if you did it on the Switch, well, F me, I guess. Lesson learned. And for all of those reasons, I'll be giving I Saw Black Clouds, which by the way is a cool title. I'm really ashamed that they used such a cool title on such a lame game. Anyways, I Saw Black Cloud is getting a 2 out of 10. It's not a 1 because the camera was in focus. I've seen some other YouTubers who review movies make that meme, and I'll make it as well. The camera was in focus indeed, even if the lighting was horrible. Recommendations wise, don't play it. Play something else. Watch a movie. If you want to watch a movie, watch a movie. If you want to play a video game, play a video game. If you want to play something in between, there's like Telltale games, which are fine, I guess. There's walking simulators, which some of them I really like. What Remains of Edith Finch is one of my favorites. You should check that one out. Gone Girl is pretty good too if you're into rummaging through someone's house. And even Death Come True, which I did not give a particularly positive review, I still thought was a lot better than this one, and it honestly makes me look at that one in a much more positive light. I think the major problem with this genre is primarily 1, going too much on the movie side, where you kind of lose the point and even having gameplay features. And beyond that, it's also definitely a budgetary problem. Games like this usually have terribly low budgets, smaller than most B movies even, and they're tasked to not only make a movie but make several movies, as of course a big part of these games is the different choices and the different paths. This is a problem that also exists in the regular video game industry. The previously mentioned Telltale games suffer from this, as from a budgetary standpoint, it's very not cost effective to develop completely different and fully fledged out paths to games based on your decisions, because the reality is a majority of those players would only ever see one of those paths. Regardless though, I would still wish someone did it. I think that would make for a really cool experience, but whatever. Will I play more of these games myself? I'll be honest, I'm not sure. Definitely not on Switch again, but I am curious to return to another one and maybe see if the trend continues. Or did I just catch one of the bad ones? Which I'll be honest, I highly doubt it. But with that said, I also don't want to be particularly wasting my money on this type of games, especially if I know I'm not particularly going to enjoy them. So, who knows? They are very useful for this channel because, I can beat this game in the morning and then review it. And that would be very helpful to reach my quota of 2 reviews a week. A lot more easy than, and I guess I'll hint my next video, Danganronpa 2, which is just so long. Do not take that out of context. Or do, I don't care. Anyways, regardless, if you enjoyed watching, please consider subscribing, liking, disliking as well. Now it doesn't really matter. It never mattered, but at least now people don't think it's a bad video because they can't see it anyways. So you can't just use it to abuse the stats, if that makes any sense. I rambled a lot in this video. Wow, we're at the 16-minute mark. Regardless, you can also comment all things you can do for free here on YouTube. That's my outro. Regardless of any of that though, I hope you're having a good day, and goodbye.